Today, car buyers are shopping online, in-store, and everything in between. Retail 360, Cox Automotive's suite of connected end-to-end tools, empowers your dealership to deliver the seamless experience consumers want. Reach out to your rep to learn more.
Welcome to Daily Drive for Wednesday, August 13th, 2025. I'm Callan Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, U.S. auto exports to Canada plummet. Suppliers continue to push tariff costs to automakers, and BMW takes the luxury fight off-road. Plus, the Trump administration continues to cut away at the Biden-era EV push. We'll hear from Gabe Klein, who led Biden's Joint Office of Energy and Transportation.
So the plain states, they are going to suffer. And it's sad, right? Because the consumers suffer.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. Canada imported more vehicles from Mexico than the United States in June for the first time in 3 decades. Canadian importers brought in nearly $1.1 billion Canadian of passenger vehicles from Mexico during the month. That's compared with $950 million Canadian from the U.S. The figures come from Statistics Canada. Meanwhile, tariffs are affecting some major suppliers' bottom lines less than they anticipated. Recent earnings reports show that parts makers continue to push costs to automakers and angle for new business in the U.S. To be sure, there are still significant risks for the supply base. Parts makers worry about the lack of clarity on where U.S. trade and EV policies will stand in the long term, making it difficult to know where to invest. And analysts say tariffs continue to pose a threat to new vehicle sales and production. And BMW plans to expand its lineup with a rugged utility model to challenge the iconic Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. Production of the rock crawler is scheduled for the second half of 2029 at BMW's plant in Greer, South Carolina. That's according to 2 people with knowledge of the plan who spoke with us at Automotive News. A BMW spokesperson declined to comment on the automaker's future product plans. And those are today's headlines. You can find more details on all those stories at autonews.com. Joining me now to talk more about the impact of tariffs on parts makers is John Irwin, who covers the supply chain and trade policy for us at Automotive News. John, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Thanks for having me.
So, John, in your story on autonews.com, you give us some good examples of suppliers who illustrate these trends, including auto tech supplier Aptive. What are they doing, and what does it say about the strategy from the broader supply base?
Yeah, Aptive was an interesting case where it sort of seemed like what they reported in the second quarter sort of matched with a lot of what we were seeing from major suppliers in the auto sector. I mean, Aptive basically reported better than expected earnings in the second quarter, despite the impact of tariffs, in large part because they were benefiting from better than expected new vehicle production as automakers were trying to, push ahead of tariffs, and from automakers kind of looking for less expensive products, maybe that they were producing in-house. Maybe if they can go to a supplier, get it a little cheaper, that'll help them offset their own tariff costs. Kevin Clark, the CEO of Aptive, basically said, to quote him, in a strange way, all the cost pressure going on in the industry is actually helpful to their business model. And Aptive, of course, it's unique to them that they're, tech supplier. In their case, they're talking specifically about ADAS systems that they offer, and automakers coming to them, maybe looking for some cost savings. But we're kind of seeing versions of that at a bunch of major suppliers where automakers who are, taking on billions of dollars in tariff costs are, coming to suppliers and saying, hey, in exchange maybe for you guys pushing, your tariff costs onto us, are you able to offer us something that's a little bit cheaper? Can we, maybe cut into our costs a bit by, you guys coming to us with something that's a little bit less expensive than something that we're producing in-house or what have you. And that's kind of doubly true when it comes to electrification versus gas-powered vehicles as well. We're seeing some suppliers who are maybe didn't bet quite as heavily on electrification as automakers are kind of extending the life cycle of some of their gas-powered vehicles, just given the uncertainty in electrification and kind of uncertainty about where trade policy is going to be long term. They're kind of sticking with the status quo for now, and suppliers that are kind of heavy in that space reported, okay, here's a chance for us to gain some additional business in the short term here at least. So it's an interesting space a lot of suppliers find themselves in. Obviously, there's some big caveats here. There are some suppliers that have been less successful in pushing costs up to their automakers. And obviously, we're talking about big, major publicly traded suppliers. I know a lot of smaller suppliers are kind of struggling a bit more than some of the bigger ones that we're talking about here.
And how long can suppliers and automakers keep this up before we see sticker prices start to go up?
Yeah, that's $1 million question. It's something that I don't know if anyone has the answer to, but I think if you look at what supplier executives were saying, they said, hey, despite some of these bright spots that we're seeing, these are still significant costs. And yeah, we're passing up to the automakers, but they're taking on billions of costs here. And they can only do that for so long before there's going to be some sort of impact on the new car market and thus new vehicle production, which is what all these suppliers rely on, of course, for their business. And most analysts that I talk to say it's probably only a matter of time until automakers are kind of forced to, at least to some extent, pass on those costs to customers, via price increases on vehicles. But when does that happen? When is that breaking point? What's the extent of it? How much do they pass on versus how much do they continue to eat? I think they're still waiting for more certainty on where trade policy is going to end up before they really commit to making some of these decisions.
Perfect. John, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much.
Coming up, Gabe Klein, the former head of the U.S. Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, talks about the changing EV landscape under President Trump. That's next on Daily Drive.
Today's consumers are using multiple channels to buy cars, online, in-store, and everything in between. And dealerships need to deliver a consistent, connected car buying experience that keeps shoppers and dealers in sync across every channel and every stage of the purchase process. Retail 360, Cox Automotive's suite of connected end-to-end tools empowers your dealership to deliver the seamless experience consumers want. With industry-leading solutions and consumer sites, Cox Automotive connects and enables shopping and buying across all channels. Consider a typical buying process. A consumer might shop for cars on AutoTrader or on a dealership's dealer.com website. At the same time, they might research the value of their trade-in on Kelley Blue Book. Whatever they're doing, your sales team will see that they're actively in market through VIN solutions. When they arrive in your showroom, you can use DealerTrack to build a deal and secure financing options. vAuto will help you price their trade-in correctly, and after they drive off the lot, you can use Xtime to keep them coming back as a lifelong service customer. Along the way, you'll get the industry's most powerful predictive insights that aggregate data from 7 out of 10 in-market shoppers and AI-led automation that puts repetitive tasks on cruise control. Reach out to your Cox Automotive rep today to learn how you can meet today's high consumer expectations to deliver a more satisfying car buying experience with Retail 360.
Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Kellen Walker. Under the Biden administration, the U.S. Joint Office of Energy and Transportation played a big role in building out private EV charging stations and filling gaps where chargers weren't available. Now, the former head of the department says the Trump administration's reversal of federal EV incentives and emissions rules could devastate the nation's ability to compete globally, especially with China. Gabe Klein spoke with our own Hannah Lutz on Shift, a podcast about mobility. Here's a piece of their conversation.
A big part of what you've done in your public role was involving the private sector. At this point, what is the role of the private sector in EV charging infrastructure, public charging infrastructure?
Survival.
Survival?
Yeah. Well, no. I mean, look, it's unfortunate what's happening right now at the federal level because I think, the worst part of it is the uncertainty, obviously, that's being created, whether it's for Ford or GM or Stellantis or Rivian and Tesla. It's like you just want stability so that you know what you can build. If something's promised to you, whether that be funding or establishing a policy or credits for being able to sell credits to companies that are not producing enough EVs, all of that is being changed. And I think it's really unfortunate because it's purposely meant to just create instability in the EV space and to try to give one last big push to the fossil fuel industry when it comes to transportation. The fossil fuel industry does not need help. I was just reading yesterday, $18 billion in subsidies that they're going to get this year. Really? Is that really needed? I don't think so. The subsidies are needed for new industry, right? And to keep up with the Chinas of the world and to make sure that we continue to lead. And so I think the state of the industry, and I talk to a lot of players, they're very confident in the future. They understand that the next couple years are going to be a period of instability, but there will likely be a shift in Congress. Then there will be a shift in the White House. And, the OEMs are on 7-year cycles to produce new vehicles. The infrastructure companies, the CPOs, can take them a couple years to ramp up an actual location and get the transformers in place and the leases done and all of that. So they are sticking to their guns. But I have also been working on subsidy-free or subsidy-light business models with some of these companies, right? The idea being that if you can't count on the federal government to be consistent anymore, how do you make lemonade out of lemons, which my old boss, Rahm Emanuel, used to say. And I think it's a good one because let's say you're a charging company that is putting in curbside chargers. That's a really important space that has been widely overlooked, including by the Joint Office. I mean, we tried to focus on it. But you might be chasing 13 chargers in one city and 7 in another and 10 in another because you're chasing the grant money. I want to be able to go to cities with an offering where we say, look, we want to put in 400 or 500 chargers. We need you to remove the obstacles to let us do it. You understand and we understand the federal government is no longer there. They're not going to be supporting this. However, you, San Francisco, you, Madison, Wisconsin, New York City, you have publicly said you want to have X number of chargers in the ground by 2030 because we have lower income people that don't have access, people multi-unit buildings. And so in that scenario, what if we can come to a city and say, hey, we've got financial backers that are going to make their money back, and we will install 500 chargers over a 12-month period. It gives the opportunity to that company to potentially reach scale much faster than if they'd relied on the federal grant money. It does take going bigger. It takes putting together a really nice, well thought out financial package. It takes cities, in some cases states, understanding the benefits of this and potentially having an upside. But I think that we can be successful without the federal government, which might sound funny coming from me, having run the Joint Office, but that's the reality that we're in today. And city government, state government can be dramatically different than federal government. I've definitely learned that.
Yeah, and I know for the NEVI funds, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, they were distributed to the states, and then the states kind of took it from there. So although the federal support is changing, as you said, the states and cities can still play a role. How are you actually seeing that play out? Are they stepping up in a bigger way? Are some pulling back because now, they can? What are you seeing?
Well, look, I'm going to be blunt and honest here. There were 22 states that were really in the boat with us. And there were a bunch that really didn't care about the program. And there were some that really cared about the program and were in the boat with us, but they had a much bigger state program. And the federal program was actually a very small percentage. And so they had to plan their overall state program and then fit NEVI and CFI and such into it. So when you had people, complain like, oh, you only built 400 chargers. Yeah, that's about what we expected in like a 2-year period. And so I think that the states that were in the game and motivated are just moving along. And many of them have a big budget on their own that they're moving forward with. The states that were doing nothing, like Florida, the Dakotas, they're going to continue to do nothing, I think. And the states that sued, 17 states sued, 14 were successful in getting the NEVI funds unfrozen. And they're going to continue to get that funding. I'm going to be very curious to see what happens with the CFI funding. I'm hoping we hear about that soon. But if you want the funding, you got to make it known you want the funding, right? Okay. You have to actually speak up for it. That's the only way you're going to get it.
It is interesting to hear how all the states are so different. They have different priorities, and we're at different points in the process through NEVI and without NEVI. And you mentioned rural areas and rural states. How should companies that want to have a charging business in those areas think about their investments there? I remember from previous reporting that very rural states like Wyoming, for example, were worried about their long-term return on the public chargers, even when that federal funding would be available.
Yeah.
So how do you make sense of that for those areas?
I mean, we tried to help folks make sense of it. The reality is it's pretty simple. The majority of people traveling through those states are from other states, right? So in the very rural states, the bulk of the travel, and I can't remember the exact percentage, is actually from urbanized areas passing through those states. And so is there going to be demand? No. If you have no chargers, nobody's going to drive through your state with their electric vehicle. And you're going to be like, I plan road trips all the time. I'm not going to be going through those states if they have no chargers. I'll be going through the states that do. And a lot of southeastern states do, and northeastern states do, and west coast states do. So the plain states outside of Colorado, Illinois, well, that's more center of the country, but they are going to suffer. And it's sad, right? Because the consumers suffer. But you see this in a host of areas, whether it be reproductive health. I mean, there's a lot of things. And I think people are actually getting up and moving because of these issues. They're like, I want access to healthcare. I want access to good quality education. I want access to EV charging stations. It's not a privilege. It's something you're going to need to function in the 21st century economy. Like, do you really want to drive a car from the 1980s or 90s because you can't have an electric car? I mean, it's just crazy.
You can hear Gabe Klein's full conversation with our own Hannah Lutz on the latest episode of Shift, a podcast about mobility. That's available now wherever you get your podcast. That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to Automotive News executive producer Jake Neer, as well as our own John Irwin and Urvash Kakaria for their reporting for today's podcast. You can get the latest news on electrification, tariffs, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. Come back tomorrow for a conversation with our own Carly Schaffner from Monterey Car Week in California. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoy the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.